What if everything you know about human history is only the last chapter of a much longer, forgotten book? Imagine for a moment that long before pyramids pierced the sky, long before satellites orbited above us, another civilization walked this earth. Not myths, not alien visitors, but something born right here, intelligent, organized, and capable of wonders we can barely imagine. And then, gone. Erased not by war or collapse, but by time itself. The oceans rose, mountains crumbled, continents drifted, and every trace of them was recycled into stone and silence. If such a civilization once existed, would we even recognize the faint signals they left behind? Or have we already stumbled across clues, dismissing them as natural accidents? Tonight, we're going to explore that unsettling possibility, that humanity may not be the first, just the latest. Part 1, the first question. When people think about history, they usually think of kings, empires, wars, monuments, and written records. Our sense of time stretches back a few thousand years and then blurs into myth or silence. But there is a deeper question, one that unsettles the mind when spoken aloud. What if humanity is not the first civilization to walk upon this planet? What if long before humans built cities, wrote laws, and launched machines into orbit, there was another intelligent culture that rose, flourished, and then disappeared without leaving a trace that we can easily recognize? The thought sounds like science fiction, but it is in fact a serious subject of discussion among some scientists who work with geology, paleoclimatology, and archaeology. The Earth is not gentle with memory. Wood decays, metal corrodes, and bones dissolve. Even mountains, which seem eternal to our short lifespans, are temporary. Over millions of years, continents drift across the globe, collide, and reshape themselves. Oceans open and close, swallowing coastlines and burying entire regions. The surface of the earth is constantly being rewritten. If we left a modern city to crumble without human maintenance, nature would reclaim it within centuries. After only a few thousand years, almost nothing recognizable would remain. And after millions of years, the record would be erased so completely that even the sharpest eye could fail to notice there was ever a human presence. That is the core of the mystery. If our own monuments, satellites, highways, and knowledge can fade into obscurity in geological time, how confident can we be that no other civilization ever existed before us? The question is not about Atlantis or myths of lost continents. It is not about alien visitors from the stars. It is about the possibility of something homegrown, an intelligent species that evolved here, perhaps in a form very different from us, perhaps using tools or technologies that we would not immediately recognize. If such beings existed tens of millions of years ago, would the Earth have preserved any trace of them? Or would the long processes of burial, erosion, and tectonic recycling have consumed their entire history? Geological time is almost impossible to imagine. Human civilization as we know it is perhaps 10,000 years old at most. That is a blink when compared to the age of the planet, which is approximately 4.5 billion years. Dinosaurs ruled the Earth for nearly 200 million years, far longer than humans have existed in any form. Entire epochs of history unfolded without mammals at all, let alone primates or people. Life itself spent billions of years in the sea as simple organisms before ever attempting to colonize land. When you consider this immensity, the story of humanity is a brief spark in an ocean of darkness. Our structures and systems appear grand to us, but in the scale of geological time, they are fragile and fleeting. Now imagine a thought experiment. Picture an intelligent species living on Earth 100 million years ago, after the rise of dinosaurs but before their extinction. Perhaps they were upright, perhaps aquatic, perhaps something we cannot even imagine. They may not have built skyscrapers or highways, but they could have organized themselves, created culture, developed ways of manipulating their environment, and perhaps even produced technologies unrecognizable to us. They may have lasted thousands of years, or even millions, and then vanished due to a catastrophe, a gradual decline, or simply the ordinary passage of time. If that happened, how would we know? The answer is troubling: we might not know at all. Consider how rare fossils are even for animals. Most creatures that have ever lived left no fossil record. Conditions for fossilization are precise and rare. A body must be buried rapidly, protected from scavengers and erosion, and then mineralized over time. Even then, it must later be exposed by erosion or excavation in order for us to find it. Multiply that improbability by tens of millions of years, and it becomes clear that most of life's history has been lost. If bones, shells, and hard tissues disappear so easily, how much harder would it be for fragile evidence of culture or technology to survive? A city made of stone may stand for centuries, but in geological terms it will be ground into dust, melted, or buried far from reach. This is why the possibility of pre-human civilizations has been taken seriously by some researchers. In 2018, two scientists, Gavin Schmidt and Adam Frank, introduced what they called the Silurian hypothesis. The name was a playful reference to a science fiction series, but the question itself was scientific. They asked, if an industrial civilization had existed on Earth millions of years ago, what evidence would remain, and could we even recognize it? Their answer was sobering. Buildings, tools, and artifacts would almost certainly vanish. The most enduring signals would be chemical rather than physical: changes in the composition of the atmosphere, alterations in the chemistry of the oceans, anomalies in the sediment layers that could not be explained by natural causes alone. It is worth thinking about our own civilization in this context. Humanity has changed the planet in measurable ways in just a few hundred years of industrial activity. We have burned fossil fuels, altering the ratio of carbon isotopes in the atmosphere. We have produced synthetic chemicals and plastics that did not exist in nature. We have released radioactive isotopes through nuclear reactions. We have triggered extinctions and altered ecosystems across the globe. These changes are already being recorded in the geological archive. If humanity vanished tomorrow, those markers might persist for tens of thousands or even millions of years. But they would not look like cities or satellites. They would look like thin chemical signals in sediment cores. The uncomfortable thought is that if we can leave such signals, then perhaps others before us did as well. Yet there is an obstacle: many natural processes can produce similar effects. Volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, methane releases, and mass extinctions have all left chemical fingerprints in the rock record. Without context, it is difficult to distinguish between an industrial cause and a natural one. This ambiguity means that even if a signal of intelligence existed, we might mistake it for something else. Some anomalies in geology remain unexplained today, but without overwhelming evidence, science usually assumes natural causes. That is not a flaw, but a necessary caution. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Still, the possibility lingers. It is not about proving that a forgotten civilization definitely existed. It is about recognizing that the Earth is ancient, that our species is recent, and that evidence does not last forever. What we see as permanence is an illusion. The pyramids, Stonehenge, or even our modern skylines may impress us, but on the scale of deep time they are temporary scratches on the surface of a restless planet. If others came before, they too would have been erased. And perhaps, like us, they once thought themselves eternal. To hold this thought is to experience humility. Humanity may not be the beginning of intelligence on Earth. We may simply be the latest chapter in a story that stretches back further than we dare to imagine. Whether there were others before us may remain forever uncertain, but the question itself is a reminder of our fragility and of the vastness of the world we live on. The Earth keeps its secrets well. Part 2, The Fragile Record. To begin to imagine whether another civilization might have once existed, we first need to understand just how easily the traces of our own could vanish. When people think of ruins, they imagine vast stone cities or ancient temples standing for thousands of years, but even these are fragile against the forces of nature. Consider what happens when a modern city is abandoned. Within a few years, vines begin to crawl through cracks in the pavement, roots push up sidewalks, and small animals move into empty buildings. Within decades, structures collapse, steel rusts, and concrete crumbles. In only a few centuries, forests reclaim the land completely. Now extend that decay over thousands or millions of years, and what once seemed indestructible becomes invisible. The Earth is a master recycler. Mountains rise and erode into rivers, which carry sediments to oceans, which in turn are recycled into the planet's mantle through the slow process of subduction. The ocean floor itself is never more than a couple of 100 million years old, a blink compared to the planet's 4.5 billion years. This means that any traces of human civilization that lie along coastlines or on continental shelves are likely doomed. They will eventually be drawn beneath tectonic plates and erased entirely. Only the continents provide surfaces old enough to hold a long record, and even those are constantly reshaped by glaciers, volcanoes, erosion, and shifting landscapes. This leads to a sobering realization: survival in the geological record is an extraordinary event, not the rule. Fossils, the very things we rely on to understand life's history, are rare exceptions. Most organisms leave no trace at all. Their bodies decay, are eaten, or dissolve long before mineralization can occur. Even when fossilization does happen, exposure and discovery are additional hurdles. Many fossils remain buried forever, inaccessible to our exploration. Thus, our knowledge of prehistoric life is drawn from a fragmentary record, a series of scattered clues rather than a complete story. If bones, shells, and teeth are so difficult to preserve, how much more fragile would cultural artifacts be? A wooden spear left on the forest floor will rot within a few years. A clay pot may last longer, but unless it is buried under the right conditions, it will break apart. Metal corrodes, glass weathers, and even stone tools can be indistinguishable from natural rocks without careful analysis. Digital storage, which carries so much of our knowledge today, is even more ephemeral. Hard drives degrade, paper burns, and electronic data vanishes as soon as the systems that preserve it fail. From the perspective of deep time, nearly everything we make is temporary. Imagine an archaeologist in the far future digging into the remnants of our civilization after millions of years. They would not find gleaming skyscrapers or intact satellites. They might find, if they were lucky, thin chemical residues in the sediment, traces of plastics, isotopes from nuclear reactions, unusual concentrations of metals, or sudden shifts in carbon ratios. These are the fingerprints of industrial activity. They do not look like monuments, but they may be the only markers that survive. If this is true for us, it must also be true for any civilization that came before. Their stories would be buried not in stone libraries but in chemical signatures hidden in layers of rock. The Silurian hypothesis, proposed by Schmidt and Frank, asked precisely this question: if an industrial civilization had existed millions of years ago, would we even know? They argued that physical remains would not endure, but chemical anomalies might. For example, burning large quantities of fossil fuels releases carbon with a distinct isotopic signature. This shift is detectable in sediments and ice cores. Plastics, though they break down over time, may leave microscopic residues that persist for tens of thousands or even millions of years under certain conditions. Nuclear reactions leave behind synthetic isotopes not found naturally in significant amounts. These are the kinds of signals that might outlast cities and languages. Yet there is a complication. Natural events can mimic these same signals. A massive volcanic eruption can release carbon dioxide, sulfur, and ash in patterns similar to industrial activity. Methane bursts from the seafloor can alter carbon ratios. Asteroid impacts scatter rare elements and cause global climate shifts. Without context, it is difficult to know whether an anomaly was created by nature or by intelligence. This means that even if we were staring directly at the remains of a past civilization, we might dismiss them as natural processes. Science favors the simplest explanation, and without overwhelming evidence, civilization is not the simplest answer. Some scientists point to events like the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, around 56 million years ago, when global temperatures rose sharply, oceans acidified, and carbon cycles shifted dramatically. To us, this resembles the very signals we are creating today through industrial activity. Yet there is no accepted evidence that any intelligent beings were responsible. The prevailing view is that natural processes caused the changes. But what if, in some future age, our own geological signals were interpreted the same way? What if the mark of humanity, subtle and ambiguous, were explained as volcanic activity or an unusual climate event? That is the humbling lesson of the Silurian hypothesis. Even if civilizations rise and fall, the record they leave may not be legible to those who come later. Another angle to consider is the bias of interpretation. Archaeologists and geologists look for certain kinds of evidence, bones, tools, artifacts, and clear signs of human activity. But intelligence may not always manifest in ways familiar to us. Consider the termite mound. To us it looks like a pile of dirt, but in reality it is a sophisticated structure with climate control, food storage, and social organization. If such structures were found in the fossil record without context, they might be dismissed as natural formations. Similarly, if a past civilization built with organic materials or used technologies we do not recognize, their traces could blend into the background of geology. Our expectations shape what we see, and what we miss. Even if artifacts survived, recognition is not guaranteed. A perfectly round sphere found in ancient rock might look like an industrial product, or it might be dismissed as a natural concretion. Strange mineral deposits might be seen as unusual but natural. Without a framework that accepts the possibility of intelligence, many anomalies will never be interpreted as such. This is not a failure of science but a reflection of its cautious nature. It avoids jumping to conclusions, especially extraordinary ones, until evidence is overwhelming. And so, if a past civilization left faint traces, they may remain unrecognized, hiding in plain sight. This brings us back to the fragility of our own record. If humanity disappeared tomorrow, the Earth would begin erasing us almost immediately. Within years, infrastructure would collapse. Within centuries, forests and deserts would reclaim cities. Within thousands of years, even our greatest monuments would be fading. Within millions of years, only the faintest chemical echoes might remain. Perhaps a thin layer of unusual isotopes. Perhaps traces of plastics in the sediments. Perhaps an extinction pattern different from those caused by asteroids or volcanoes. But would that be enough to prove we once existed? To future beings, our legacy might be indistinguishable from natural disasters. And so the question remains open, balanced on uncertainty. If we cannot guarantee that our own existence will be obvious to the future, how can we be sure that no one came before? The Earth is an old and restless planet. It keeps only fragments of its past and erases the rest. To imagine that intelligence arose only once in all that time may be comforting, but it may also be naive. We stand at the edge of deep time, holding a fragile record, and we cannot be certain how many stories it has already lost. Part 3: Signals in the Stone. When scientists look into the deep past of the Earth, they do not turn to libraries or archives in the way historians do. Their books are layers of stone, their pages written in minerals, isotopes, and fossils. The geological record is our main tool for reconstructing what the world was like millions or even billions of years ago. But it is also an incomplete and unreliable witness. The record is full of gaps, distortions, and erasures. If a civilization once existed far back in time, it would have had to leave behind signals strong enough to resist the relentless processes of geology. Understanding those signals is the key to imagining how we might detect something older than humanity. To begin, consider how the Earth records events. Sediments accumulate in layers, dust falling into lakes, volcanic ash settling on the ground, shells collecting on the seafloor. Over time, these layers compress into rock, trapping within them chemical traces of the environment at the moment they formed. By studying carbon isotopes, oxygen ratios, or the presence of certain minerals, scientists can reconstruct ancient climates and ecosystems. Sometimes these layers also preserve fossils or impressions of organisms, providing a snapshot of life in that time. Yet these records are not evenly distributed. Some eras are represented by thick layers of sediment, while others are missing entirely, erased by erosion or never deposited in the first place. Geologists call these missing chapters unconformities, and they remind us that Earth's memory is patchy at best. This patchiness is important when we ask whether an ancient civilization could be detected. If entire regions and epochs are missing from the geological record, the chances of finding fragile traces of culture become even slimmer. Even large events, like asteroid impacts, sometimes leave only faint scars. The Chicxulub impact that ended the reign of the dinosaurs is visible today as a buried crater in Mexico and as a thin global layer rich in iridium. But if we did not already know what to look for, we might miss its significance. How much harder would it be to detect something as subtle as industrial pollution from a civilization that vanished tens of millions of years earlier? Still, there are certain kinds of signals that might endure longer than bones or buildings. Chemical anomalies are among the most promising. Burning fossil fuels, for instance, changes the ratio of carbon isotopes in the atmosphere. This shift becomes locked into sediments and can persist for millions of years. Plastics and synthetic compounds, though they degrade in sunlight and oxygen, may survive in oxygen-free sediments, leaving behind microscopic residues. Industrial processes concentrate rare elements like lead or cadmium in ways unlikely to occur naturally. Nuclear activity produces isotopes that would not otherwise be present. These are subtle clues, but they are global in scale and could persist across deep time. The difficulty lies in interpretation. Natural processes can mimic these same patterns. Volcanic eruptions can inject carbon dioxide and sulfur into the atmosphere, producing shifts similar to those caused by industry. Methane releases can alter isotope ratios in ways that look industrial but are not. Asteroid impacts scatter unusual elements and trigger climate changes. Even massive blooms of microorganisms can leave chemical signatures that resemble pollution. Without additional context, it is difficult to say whether an anomaly is evidence of intelligence or a quirk of nature. Consider the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum again, a period around 56 million years ago when global temperatures rose sharply, oceans acidified, and ecosystems were disrupted. The chemical fingerprints left behind look disturbingly similar to the ones we are leaving now through industrial activity. Yet the accepted explanation is a natural release of carbon, perhaps from methane hydrates or volcanic eruptions. If a civilization had existed then and triggered those changes, would we be able to tell? Or would we simply assume a natural cause, as we do now? This is the unsettling challenge of interpreting the geological record. The problem is not only one of science but of perspective. We expect civilizations to leave behind monuments, tools, and writing. But intelligence might manifest differently. Termite mounds, coral reefs, or beaver dams are examples of organisms altering their environment in ways that are organized and intentional, even if we do not call them civilizations. If a species millions of years ago organized itself without building in stone or metal, its traces might not be recognizable to us. They might appear as natural formations, subtle chemical changes, or patterns we have not learned to interpret. Our definitions of civilization are shaped by human history, but nature might have produced intelligence in forms unfamiliar to us. Even when unusual objects are found in ancient rock, they are rarely accepted as evidence of intelligence. Stories from the 19th century tell of miners discovering metal objects in coal seams, or carved artifacts embedded in stone. Most of these claims lack reliable documentation and are dismissed as mistakes or hoaxes. In South Africa, small metallic spheres were once found in Precambrian rock, and some suggested they were manufactured. Later studies showed they were natural concretions formed under pressure. These examples show the tension between open-minded curiosity and scientific caution. Without clear context and repeatable evidence, anomalies remain curiosities rather than proof. This raises a deeper point: evidence must not only survive but also be recognized for what it is. A layer of strange polymers in ancient sediments might be dismissed as an unusual natural deposit. An unusual ratio of isotopes might be explained as volcanic activity. Without a framework that allows for the possibility of ancient civilizations, such signals may never be interpreted as evidence of intelligence. They would remain anomalies in the geological record, filed away as unexplained but natural. If that seems discouraging, it should also remind us of our own fragility. Imagine a geologist millions of years from now encountering the thin layer of rock that corresponds to the 21st century. They might notice a spike in carbon dioxide, a drop in biodiversity, traces of synthetic compounds, or isotopes from nuclear testing. But without additional context, they might attribute it to a natural event. They would not find intact cities or libraries. They would not see our languages or art. They would see chemical echoes, ambiguous and easy to misinterpret. If that is true for us, it could also be true for any who came before. Yet it is precisely this ambiguity that makes the question valuable. Even if we never prove that another civilization existed, asking the question forces us to think differently about evidence, about time, and about our own place in history. It teaches humility. It reminds us that permanence is an illusion and that our own achievements are temporary in the face of deep time. It encourages scientists to look more carefully at anomalies, to consider alternative explanations, and to test the limits of their methods. In this way, the search for ancient civilizations becomes less about finding them and more about understanding the fragility of knowledge itself. The Earth does not keep a diary. It erases more than it preserves. But every so often, it leaves a signal strong enough to resist the eraser, a chemical fingerprint, a fossil, a crater, a sudden shift in sediment. These are the places where we might look for the faint echoes of intelligence. Whether those echoes belong only to us or to others long forgotten may never be certain. But the possibility that the stone still holds secrets is enough to keep us searching, reading the slow language of geology, and listening for voices that may have spoken long before our own. Part 4: Echoes of the Forgotten. The question of whether a civilization could have existed before ours pushes us into strange territory, not only scientifically but also philosophically. We like to think of ourselves as unique, as the pinnacle of Earth's long experiment with life. Yet when we look closely at the processes that shape the planet, we are confronted with a troubling truth: permanence is a myth. Everything visible today, from our cities to our satellites, is fleeting. To imagine that we are the only intelligent beings to have ever risen here may be comforting, but it ignores the scale and power of geological time. If anything, the Earth has been designed to forget. Start with the fossil record. Most people imagine fossils as faithful snapshots of ancient life, dinosaur skeletons displayed in museums, seashells preserved in stone, or plants imprinted into shale. In reality, fossils are rare, fragmented, and biased. They occur only when a unique set of conditions are met: rapid burial, low oxygen, mineral replacement, and geological stability. Even then, survival depends on luck. The fossil must later be exposed without being destroyed, and then it must be discovered by someone who recognizes it. The vast majority of organisms that ever lived have vanished without leaving any trace at all. If this is true for bones and shells, which are naturally durable, it is even truer for artifacts of culture and technology. A clay shard, a metal blade, or a wooden structure would have far less chance of surviving deep time. Consider Homo erectus, a species that lived for nearly 2 million years, a span 20 times longer than modern humans have existed. From this long era, what do we have? A few bones, stone tools, and faint hints of fire use. We know almost nothing about how they organized themselves, what they believed, or how they interacted with their environment. If so little survives from such a recent and long-lived species, how much less would survive from a hypothetical civilization that lived tens of millions of years ago? Even if such beings built, invented, and dreamed, their voices would be lost to the silence of geology. This silence is not empty, though. It is filled with gaps, anomalies, and hints that sometimes whisper of more than natural processes. Scientists study isotope excursions, sudden, sharp shifts in the ratios of carbon, oxygen, or nitrogen that are preserved in rock layers. These shifts usually correspond to major events: volcanic outbursts, methane releases, asteroid impacts, or mass extinctions. Yet some remain difficult to explain fully. The planet's chemical vocabulary is complex, and distinguishing between natural and artificial causes is challenging. This ambiguity is where the possibility of forgotten civilizations hides. If any evidence remains, it would be subtle: a strange ratio of carbon isotopes, a thin layer of unusual metals, or a sudden extinction pattern that does not match known catastrophes. But would we even recognize such evidence? Human bias shapes what we see. When archaeologists find a flint blade, they recognize it as a tool because they understand how it was made. But what if an ancient civilization used materials or methods that do not resemble ours at all? A termite mound looks like dirt to the casual observer, yet it is a marvel of engineering, with ventilation systems, temperature regulation, and agriculture built in. Scale that up, bury it for 1,000,000 years, and it might leave nothing but an odd pattern in the soil, dismissed as natural. The lesson is clear: intelligence does not always look like us, and civilization does not always leave monuments. The oceans deepen this mystery. Most human civilizations throughout history have thrived along coastlines, where resources are abundant and trade is easy. Yet coastlines are among the least stable regions on Earth. Sea levels rise and fall with ice ages, storms reshape shores, and tectonic shifts redraw maps. Over the last 20,000 years alone, seas have risen more than 100 meters, drowning vast tracts of land where people once lived. If a civilization existed tens of millions of years ago near ancient coasts, its remains would now lie beneath layers of sediment, buried in seabeds that are themselves destined for subduction and recycling. The oceans are not preservers of history, they are erasers. And yet, there are traces we might look for. Plastics, though fragile on the surface, can persist for long times when buried in anoxic environments. Microplastics are already accumulating in sediments worldwide, carried into deep trenches and polar ice. Some could last for hundreds of thousands of years, perhaps longer. Synthetic isotopes, created by nuclear reactions, provide another potential marker. Though many decay quickly, some persist for millions of years. If discovered in ancient sediments with no natural explanation, they would raise profound questions. Similarly, unusual concentrations of rare earth metals or heavy elements could suggest industrial processes. These would not look like artifacts but rather like chemical scars, accidental fossils of intelligence. Still, even the strongest markers can fade or be misinterpreted. Imagine a geologist in the distant future finding a thin layer rich in carbon, with traces of plastics and isotopes. Without cultural context, they might assume it was a natural methane release or a volcanic eruption. They would not see cities or satellites, only an anomaly. Our greatest achievements could be mistaken for accidents of nature. This is the central irony: the more advanced a civilization becomes, the more its traces resemble natural phenomena when stripped of context. This brings us to the thought experiment of our own disappearance. If humanity vanished tomorrow, what would survive? In the first years, little would change. Cities would stand, lights would shine until power grids failed, and satellites would orbit silently overhead. But without maintenance, decay would begin quickly. Water systems would collapse, subways would flood, steel would rust, and concrete would crack. Within centuries, forests would overgrow cities, deserts would bury roads, and animals would reclaim abandoned spaces. Within a few thousand years, little would remain visible. The pyramids and Mount Rushmore might endure longer than glass towers, but even they would eventually erode. After 1,000,000 years, the surface of the earth would show almost nothing of us. Only deep underground storage, long-lived isotopes, or chemical residues in sediments might hint that we were here at all. This scenario is not just imagination. It is a guide for how to think about possible civilizations of the past. If our traces could vanish so thoroughly, why could not theirs? And if their signals were faint and ambiguous, would we even know how to interpret them? Perhaps some anomalies in the geological record are already such signals, waiting for a framework that allows them to be seen for what they are. Or perhaps the Earth has erased every last sign, leaving us alone with questions that cannot be answered. In either case, the exercise changes how we see ourselves. Instead of assuming that humanity is the first and only intelligent culture, we begin to see ourselves as part of a continuum, one chapter in a book whose earlier pages have been torn out. This is not a call to embrace myths of lost continents or stories of hidden empires. It is a call to humility. It is a reminder that our own permanence is an illusion and that the earth will continue long after our monuments and stories are gone. The stone carries echoes, but they are faint, and whether they belong to us or to someone else, they are easily lost. The search for ancient civilizations is therefore not only about finding others. It is also about understanding ourselves. It shows us how fragile our legacy is, how quickly nature reclaims and erases, and how easily our story might vanish into silence. Whether we are the first or merely the latest, the truth is the same: the earth forgets, and it forgets almost everything. What survives is rare, precious, and often ambiguous. To listen to those echoes is to listen to the earth itself, which speaks not in words but in stone, chemistry, and time. Part 5, Lessons from Deep Time. When we reflect on the vast span of Earth's history, a humbling pattern emerges. Life has flourished and collapsed in waves, civilizations of animals and ecosystems have risen and fallen, and the surface of the world has been rewritten again and again. Mountains appear and vanish, oceans open and close, species dominate for millions of years only to vanish without trace. Humanity, by contrast, has been here for a blink. All of recorded history fits into a tiny fraction of 1% of Earth's lifetime. If we ask whether we are alone as the only intelligent species to have risen here, we are also asking whether our brief spark is truly unique in all this unimaginable immensity of time. The fossil record gives us a distorted view of this immensity. We celebrate the discovery of a dinosaur skeleton, a petrified forest, or an ancient reef as if these are complete pictures of the past. But in truth they are fragments. For every fossil displayed in a museum, there are countless billions of organisms that lived and died unseen, their bodies gone without a trace. Our knowledge of deep time is built from a handful of lucky survivors, tiny clues that hint at what once was. This fragility suggests that if intelligence existed before us, its traces could have vanished just as easily, or be buried so deeply that we may never find them. Geologists often speak of deep time as something almost incomprehensible. 10,000 years, the span of civilization, feels immense to us. But 10,000 years is nothing when compared to 1,000,000, and 1,000,000 is nothing when compared to 100 million. Dinosaurs thrived for almost 200 million years, an incomprehensible stretch of time compared to our own tenure. If creatures like that could vanish so completely that only scattered bones remain, then what chance would fragile evidence of culture or technology have over such scales? Time is not neutral, it is an active eraser. It wears down, it buries, it dissolves. It leaves only whispers. And yet, despite this erasure, the Earth sometimes keeps faint signals of its past. Mass extinctions are one of the clearest. The end of the Permian, the end of the Cretaceous, these events left marks not only in fossils but also in chemistry. Sudden changes in carbon isotopes, spikes in rare elements like iridium, unusual deposits of soot or ash, these are global signals that stand out even millions of years later. If a civilization once changed the atmosphere, disrupted ecosystems, or released synthetic compounds, similar markers could survive. They would not look like monuments or machines. They would look like subtle anomalies in layers of stone. The Silurian hypothesis reminds us to think in these terms. It does not claim that an ancient civilization did exist, only that if it did, its remains would be almost invisible. Instead of pyramids, we would expect isotope shifts. Instead of tools, we would expect strange chemical residues. Instead of writing, we would expect unexplained extinctions or unusual layers in the rock. This inversion of expectations is both unsettling and enlightening. It forces us to see our own civilization not through the lens of culture but through the lens of geology. It shows us how fragile even our grandest achievements really are. Imagine for a moment that far in the future, long after humanity has disappeared, another intelligence studies the layers of Earth. They find a sudden spike of carbon dioxide, a decline in biodiversity, and traces of synthetic polymers. They argue among themselves, was this caused by volcanoes, by natural methane, or by something else? Without context, the conclusion may never be clear. Perhaps they will assume natural causes, just as we do when we look back at the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum. In this way, our own existence could become ambiguous, debated, and possibly forgotten. If this is true for us, it could have been true for others before us. The philosophical weight of this realization is immense. It suggests that civilizations are not only fragile in their existence but also fragile in their memory. To live and to vanish may be natural, but to be remembered is rare. Memory requires survival, and survival requires more than endurance. It requires conditions that are almost miraculous. Without them, history dissolves into silence. This silence is the dominant sound of deep time. For every species we know, countless more are forgotten. For every moment preserved, countless more are erased. To imagine we are the only intelligent culture to ever emerge may be less realistic than to imagine that intelligence has appeared, disappeared, and been erased many times. And yet, even if we are the only ones, the lesson remains: our achievements are not safe from time. We build as if our works will last forever. We write books, raise monuments, launch satellites, and carve our names into stone. But deep time is patient. It can wait for erosion to grind down mountains, for tectonic plates to recycle continents, for oceans to swallow coastlines. It will wait for forests to grow over our cities, for deserts to bury our roads, for ice to scrape clean the land. In the end, the earth will win. It always does. We may believe we are eternal, but the earth does not keep our secrets. This should not be cause for despair. It should be cause for humility. To know that we may be forgotten is to see ourselves clearly, not as masters of the world but as temporary guests. It should also inspire us to reflect on what truly matters. If our monuments will vanish, perhaps the legacy worth leaving is not in stone but in how we live, how we care for each other, and how we care for the planet that sustains us. Our impact may be chemical, but our meaning is human. Even if no trace of us remains, what we do while we are here shapes the lives around us, and that may be the only eternity we can claim. Another lesson of deep time is that survival requires adaptation. Civilizations that ignore their environment collapse. Ecosystems that cannot adjust to change perish. Humanity has already altered the earth in ways that will echo for thousands of years. Whether those echoes are remembered as a tragedy or as a turning point depends on what we do now. We can either continue down the path of unsustainable consumption, leaving behind only a scar in the rock record, or we can learn to live in harmony with the cycles of the earth. The choice is ours, though time itself is indifferent. In a way, the possibility of forgotten civilizations is a mirror. It shows us what we risk becoming. If others once lived, thrived, and vanished without trace, then we are not immune to the same fate. If no others lived before us, then the lesson is sharper still: we are the first, and we must decide whether we will also be the last. Either way, the silence of the earth is a warning. It tells us that intelligence alone does not guarantee survival. It must be coupled with wisdom, restraint, and respect for the forces of nature. Without these, even the brightest flame is quickly extinguished. The stone remembers little, but it remembers enough to teach. It remembers the rise and fall of species, the impact of asteroids, the roar of volcanoes, and the long rhythms of climate. If intelligence has walked this earth before, its traces are hidden in those rhythms, faint and ambiguous. If not, then our own marks are the first, and they too will fade. Either way, the earth continues, indifferent to our presence, patient in its forgetting. What remains is not proof of our permanence but the fragile beauty of our moment. We exist now, briefly, in the vast darkness of time. That is both our burden and our gift. Part 6: The Vanishing Legacy. To think about the destiny of civilizations is to confront the uncomfortable truth of impermanence. Every empire in human history, no matter how mighty, eventually collapsed. Every monument, no matter how carefully built, eventually cracked, crumbled, or was buried. The story of humanity is filled with ruins that once stood as symbols of eternity. Yet these ruins are recent, only a few thousand years old at most, and already many are degraded. What then of our modern world, with its vast cities of steel and glass, its fragile electronics, its sprawling infrastructure. To us they feel permanent. To deep time they are less than dust. Let us imagine a thought experiment: humanity disappears tomorrow. No wars, no disasters, simply absence. The first weeks would bring silence to cities, the hum of machines fading as power plants shut down without caretakers. Lights would go dark, subways would flood, and roads would begin to crack under weather and roots. Within a few decades, bridges would collapse, towers would weaken, and nature would reclaim what we once called civilization. Animals would expand into empty neighborhoods, forests would spread, deserts would creep across abandoned fields. Within centuries, all but the most durable monuments would be gone. The familiar face of human achievement would vanish into wilderness. Extend this thought further. Within thousands of years, even the great pyramids and mountain carvings would erode. Dams would collapse, rivers would change course, and coastlines would reshape. The steel skeletons of skyscrapers would rust into nothing, while glass towers would shatter into sand. Our satellites, orbiting in silence, would eventually fall and burn in the atmosphere or drift into the void. After millions of years, the surface of the Earth would carry almost no visible trace of us. Only in the subsurface, in chemical residues and isotopes, would our legacy persist. We would exist not as builders of cities but as a thin layer of altered stone, indistinguishable from natural events without careful analysis. This is not speculation alone. We can already see how fast nature consumes what we build. Entire towns abandoned due to disaster or war have been swallowed by vegetation in mere decades. The ruins of Chernobyl are choked with forests and animals. Cities of the ancient world, once mighty centers of power, lie buried beneath soil and sand, forgotten until archaeologists dig them up. The lesson is clear: even in short spans of time, human works are fragile. Against the relentless patience of geological time, they are nothing. If our own civilization can vanish so completely, then any that came before would be equally erased. Perhaps they thrived millions of years ago, perhaps only briefly, but their traces would have dissolved into the Earth's cycles. The oceans would have swallowed their coasts, tectonic plates would have recycled their floors, glaciers would have scraped their monuments away, and erosion would have ground their structures into dust. The legacy of intelligence is not immune to the same forgetting that consumes species, mountains, and seas. Intelligence leaves echoes, but echoes fade. What survives are the indirect markers, the chemical scars. Industrial activity alters the carbon cycle, and that alteration becomes written into sediments. Plastics, though fragile on the surface, may persist as microfragments trapped in anoxic layers of mud. Nuclear activity produces isotopes that outlast civilizations, sometimes for millions of years. Mining and metallurgy concentrate rare elements in unusual ways. These are our fingerprints, more durable than buildings, more enduring than words. They are faint, but they last. And yet, as we have seen, natural processes can mimic them. Volcanic eruptions, methane releases, and asteroid impacts create similar signals. The difference between civilization and catastrophe is subtle, and without context it may never be clear. This ambiguity cuts both ways. When we look back into the rock record, we may already be seeing signals of intelligence without recognizing them. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum is one candidate: a sudden warming, a spike in carbon, a disruption of ecosystems. To us, it resembles what we are causing today. But we explain it as natural, because we have no reason to think otherwise. Perhaps we are right. Perhaps we are not. The point is that even if a civilization once existed, its legacy would be debated, doubted, and perhaps dismissed. Memory requires not only traces but also interpretation, and interpretation is shaped by expectation. Now imagine the far future, when another species, perhaps evolved from birds or cephalopods or something yet unimaginable, digs into the Earth's crust. They will find a layer rich in plastics, isotopes, and chemical residues. They will see a sudden extinction of species, a disruption of climate, a scar in the rock. Will they recognize us? Or will they assume it was another volcanic outburst, another natural pulse in Earth's restless rhythm? If they do not recognize us, then we too will join the long silence of forgotten civilizations. We may be the most advanced beings to ever live here, but without recognition, we will be indistinguishable from accidents of nature. This realization forces us to reconsider the meaning of legacy. We often think of legacy as monuments, writings, or achievements carved into history. But if history itself is so fragile, perhaps legacy must be redefined. It is not what we leave in stone, but what we leave in cycles of life. It is how we treat the earth that sustains us, how we shape the biosphere, how we influence the trajectory of evolution. Our monuments may crumble, but the changes we make to ecosystems, to species, to climate, will echo in the deep time record. That is the true permanence of humanity, for better or worse. If there were civilizations before us, they too would have left such echoes. Perhaps they altered the climate, introduced chemicals, or disrupted ecosystems. Perhaps their disappearance marked the end of an age, a subtle extinction woven into the fossil record. We may never know. What matters is that the earth remembers them not as builders but as disruptions. And that is how it will remember us too, not as individuals, nations, or cultures, but as a geological event. We will be a layer in the stone, a pulse in the chemistry, a scar in the biosphere. That is our true face in deep time. There is a kind of humility in this. We build as though our works will endure forever, but they will not. We dream of immortality, but the earth gives none. What we are left with is a fleeting presence, a moment of awareness in an ancient silence. Perhaps intelligence has risen many times, perhaps only once. Either way, it is fragile. Either way, it vanishes. The lesson is not despair but clarity. We exist now, and that existence is rare and precious. Whether we are remembered in stone or not, the meaning lies in how we live, how we use our moment, how we treat the world that carries us. Part 7, The Final Reflection. Standing at the edge of deep time, one cannot help but feel the weight of perspective. Humanity, with its cities, technologies, and endless ambitions, is but a flicker in the story of Earth. We have existed for an instant compared to the planet's long memory, and yet we are already searching backward and forward, asking whether we are alone. The question is not only whether other civilizations walked here before us but also whether we ourselves will endure long enough to be remembered. In both directions, the answer seems uncertain. If civilizations did exist before us, then the earth has hidden them well. Their monuments are gone, their languages erased, their cultures dissolved into silence. The only place they could remain is in the chemical fingerprints buried in stone. But those fingerprints are ambiguous, always open to natural explanation. To claim them as proof of intelligence would require more certainty than the record can offer. And so they remain mysteries, unexplained events in Earth's long history, fascinating but inconclusive. If no civilizations came before us, then our place is even stranger. Out of billions of years, with countless species rising and falling, intelligence has appeared only now, in us. That makes us fragile, a singular accident in a vast experiment. It also makes us responsible. For if we are truly the first, then the future of intelligence on this planet rests with us. To fail, to collapse, to vanish without passing the torch, would be to let the story of awareness end almost as soon as it began. Either possibility carries weight. If others came before, we must ask why they vanished and what lessons we can learn from their silence. If none came before, we must ask how we can avoid being forgotten, how we can preserve not only our species but the spark of consciousness itself. In both cases, humility is required. We are not eternal. We are temporary participants in a much older and larger story, and our survival is not guaranteed. Consider again the markers of civilization that endure. They are not monuments, not libraries, not even art. They are scars, shifts in carbon, traces of plastic, isotopes from nuclear reactions, extinctions of species. That is what the earth keeps. It keeps the consequences of our actions, not the intentions behind them. This means that our legacy, at least in geology, will be defined not by what we tried to build but by what we destroyed or altered. In this way, the earth remembers civilizations only as disruptions. What does it mean, then, to be remembered only as a scar? Some might find it discouraging. But there is another perspective. To be remembered at all in deep time is rare. Most species vanish without trace. Most moments dissolve without record. If humanity leaves behind a layer that future beings can identify, then we will have achieved something almost miraculous. We will have inscribed ourselves into the very stone of the planet. That inscription may not tell our full story, but it will say this much, that we were here, that we changed the world, that intelligence once arose in the deep silence of Earth. There is also another form of legacy, one not written in stone but in continuity. If humanity survives, adapts, and evolves, then our legacy is not in what we leave behind but in what we become. Civilizations are not static, they transform. The ruins of ancient empires became the foundations of new ones. The lessons of failure became the seeds of resilience. If we endure, then deep time will not see us as a scar alone but as the beginning of something longer, a chapter that did not end in silence. But survival is not guaranteed. Our own actions threaten to shorten our story. We burn fuels that change the climate, we release chemicals that poison ecosystems, we drive species to extinction. These are the very signals that will endure in stone. They are already becoming part of Earth's record. If we continue without change, our legacy may be nothing more than a thin dark layer marking the rapid collapse of biodiversity. Future beings, if they exist, may interpret it as a catastrophe, not a civilization. That is the risk of our current path, to be remembered not for wisdom but for recklessness. And so the thought of forgotten civilizations is more than speculation. It is a mirror. It shows us what may await us if we do not adapt. Perhaps there were others, once. Perhaps they too reached a point of power, altered their world, and vanished. If so, their fate is a warning. If not, then the silence is a challenge. We are the first, and we must decide whether we will also be the last. In either case, the responsibility is ours. This reflection returns us to humility, but also to urgency. The earth does not need us. It will continue with or without us, reshaping itself as it always has. But if intelligence is rare, if consciousness is fragile, then our survival matters. We are the custodians of something precious, the ability to reflect, to ask questions, to search for meaning. That ability may not appear again for millions of years, or ever. To lose it would be to silence a voice that the universe rarely allows to speak. Perhaps the greatest legacy we can leave, then, is not in monuments or chemicals but in continuity of thought, in passing forward the spark of awareness. Whether through preservation of our species, through stewardship of the planet, or even through the expansion of intelligence beyond Earth, our task is to ensure that the story does not end with us. This is the lesson hidden in the silence of deep time. civilizations are temporary, but intelligence can endure if it adapts. And so, when we ask whether there were others before us, we are really asking what will happen to us. The question is a parable about impermanence, responsibility, and humility. It tells us that the earth forgets, that time erases, that memory is fragile. It tells us that what we call permanence is only illusion. And it tells us that if we want to be more than a scar in stone, we must change how we live. For now, we are here, alive in this fleeting moment. We stand between the silence of the past and the silence of the future. Whether we are the first or the last, we are part of a story much older and larger than ourselves. To recognize this is to see clearly, to understand that our task is not to conquer the earth but to care for it, not to build monuments but to build resilience, not to seek eternity in stone but to seek continuity in life. The earth may forget us, but if we live wisely, intelligence need not vanish with us. That is the final reflection. We may not know if others came before, and we may not know what will come after. But in this brief interval, in this fragile spark of time, we are here. We can choose how to live, how to leave our mark, and how to pass forward the story of awareness. The silence of the earth will always close around us, but within that silence we have the chance to speak, to care, and to endure. As we journey back through the immense corridors of deep time, we are left with a sobering realization: the earth is not a museum of civilizations, but a restless, living system that forgets almost everything. Whether or not there were others before us, the truth remains the same: time is the great eraser, and all that we build, no matter how magnificent, will one day vanish. Mountains crumble, oceans rise and fall, continents drift, and even the strongest monuments are swallowed by the slow, patient hand of geology. Our search for traces of ancient intelligence has taught us more about ourselves than about them. If civilizations did exist before, their silence is a warning: power and brilliance do not guarantee survival. If no others came before, then our presence here is even more fragile, perhaps the only spark of self-awareness the earth has ever carried. Either way, our task is clear. We must live with humility, knowing that our mark upon the earth will be faint and temporary, but also knowing that our choices today ripple forward into the future of life itself. The legacies that survive are not the ones carved in stone, but the ones written into the cycles of nature. Our legacy will not be the cities we build or the monuments we leave behind, but the impact we have on the biosphere, the species we save or extinguish, the climate we protect or destroy, the wisdom we pass on or squander. These are the echoes that will remain long after we are gone. And yet, there is beauty in this impermanence. To know that our time is brief is to recognize how precious it is. To know that our works will fade is to focus on what truly matters: compassion, awareness, and the stewardship of a planet that does not belong to us alone. We stand now in a rare and fleeting moment, capable of reflection, capable of choice. If intelligence has never existed before us, then we are the first. If it has, then we are one more voice in a chorus the earth has nearly silenced. In either case, what we do with our moment matters. So as you reflect on the possibility of forgotten civilizations and the inevitability of our own impermanence, let it not fill you with despair, but with perspective. We are temporary, yes, but we are also alive right now, capable of meaning, capable of change. The greatest gift of this awareness is the chance to shape our story with wisdom, so that if future beings ever uncover the faint echoes of our existence, they will see not only the scars of our mistakes but also the signs of our care. If this journey through time and imagination has stirred something within you, if it has made you see the world and our place in it a little differently, then I invite you to stay with us. Join this exploration, continue this reflection, and be part of a community that looks beyond the surface to the deeper truths. Subscribe now to Documentary for Sleep, and together, let us keep searching, keep questioning, and keep listening for the echoes of the forgotten.